But without further ado, welcome to Succession Planting this summer. I'm Nikki,
I'm David.
and we're from Permaculture Gardens. And this is mostly going to be, I would say, David. Dave talking about succession planting is the master succession planter. I like to start with wins. I want to know what you all have done that you want to celebrate in your garden. If any, even if it's as simple as you've come to this webinar and you want to learn about succession planting. But if you are harvesting, please drop those in the chat. I'd love to hear that. What would you say your wins are?
Oh, we've started to harvest all of our spring stuff. So we're getting cabbage, beets, peas, um, carrots, what
Fava
else?
beans,
Broccoli.
broccoli heads, like broccoli, like what we used to buy in the supermarket, and
So,
beets, lots and lots of beets. So
so it's
wonderful.
exciting for all
Let me
the
see what everybody
spring
else is
harvest, but
doing.
it's a bit of a challenge now to get all the summer things in.
Yeah, how about you guys? Drop it in the chat. I hope I'm not missing anything. I'm opening the chat, checking out to see what are you harvesting or what are you starting to grow or planting, even if it's like, you've started winding down the lettuce and now we're going to do
Did,
a
did
different.
you want us to jump in?
Oh, you can jump in if you want to or
I'm
put it
just
in the chat. Yes.
cleaning up lettuces and spinach and garlic scapes finished today, and so there'll be some space opening up.
Yay. Yes.
Yes,
Perfect for
yes.
today's webinar. Yeah, wonderful. Garlic scapes too. I've got a lot of those, but I haven't yet used them, honestly. I've used them a little bit, but
To stir fry, yeah.
I stir fry them. I think I'm lazy.
I think there's too much that
Too much going on, too much,
yeah.
yeah. I actually my win is that I braided the garlic and I hung it up. And it's hanging in the shed. But here's how we'll flow tonight. Planning, we'll talk about what this means, succession planting, how to do this ecologically.
Covering that today.
Okay, but we're also introducing a few perennials, that being said. And we'll start with planning your summer garden and what should I be planting right now, as you had mentioned, Tracy. So it's good to consider what the different growing rates are of our crops. So we have fast crops under 30 days, like radishes, arugula, scallions, or microgreens that one could keep on growing to some extent, because if you're just depending on where you are, like 30 days, you can still try them and see what you get. Medium crops are a little, now these are like our summer crops that we're getting into, and then our slow crops later on in the season we may want to. Would you recommend this if this is like looking
Yeah,
forward
so I
to?
have a chart a little later that it explains this in more detail, but there's certain crops that you start now. Luckily, they germinate quite well quickly, or you can get them in a state where you plant them immediately after you get them, and they'll grow the whole summer, and you won't harvest them until kind of like early mid-fall. So I'll be talking about the how you mix the functional usage of those slower growing crops with your other crops so that you have a complete garden. So this is a really kind of loaded chart, so let me unpack it. What you're seeing here is three different columns here. So in the left, so these are kind of like common popular vegetables to grow during the summer. The first column shows the speed to germination. So you can see something like a bell pepper has a really slow germination, even though once it starts to germinate and it's ready to transplant, it grows very quickly. But it would be very hard right now to start a bell pepper right now from seed successfully and get a really good harvest in the summer because it takes so long to initially grow. So that's why the first column is kind of useful. It's just to get an idea. When we're talking like succession crops, with one of the first things we're thinking about is you need something that germinates pretty quick, because if it takes like a month and a half for it to germinate and grow into a seedling, it's going to be pretty difficult to grow multiple waves of those things. The second column here is the days to harvest. So what that means is once you've transplanted it into the garden, how long before you can expect to first start getting harvest from that crop. So tomatoes, you'll could be yielding for months after they first start yielding. But this is how long you need to wait until you first get a harvest. So again, if something you have to wait for it to, like 2 months before you get a harvest, you're probably not going to be able to do succession planting with it. And then finally, the third column shows kind of like if you planted this plant and nothing else in a 4x4 bed, what is the overall yield that you would get in terms of pounds? So you can see like a tomato is a very high value crop because even though it takes a while to germinate and it's kind of like medium in terms of how long it takes to harvest, you get a very big yield once you grow that. So it's just all those things you're trying to balance them to think about. I've highlighted a few suggestions in red. And this isn't all the things. I think Swiss chard you could also, and basil you could successfully succession plant, but these are like the no-brainer succession plantings that you can do in the summer. And succession planting, for those who aren't familiar, it just means that you're not planting all of your seeds in one wave. What you're doing is you're staggering your plantings. So you plant every couple weeks so that you're getting multiple harvests of these plants grow quickly enough that in a single season, you'll get multiple harvests.
Well, the truth is there are 3 different ways to look at succession planting. Uh-oh, the slide slid. Okay. All right. So one is like what Dave said, you have the same crop staggered timing of that crop. So you're planting, for instance, beans is a one of those no-brainer ones that you had. Bush beans in particular, every 2 weeks, for instance. So here you have a seed flat. If you were still planting from seed, and then you would plant something else, and then you would plant beans again. So that's like an example of what succession planting can mean in that case. And then there's also different crops in sequence in the same plot, but according to the season. So now we're coming out of the fall season where we're clearing up our lettuces and such and cabbages. And then we are going into the summer. So we're going to replace the same bed with summer crops. And then we're going to think about midsummer, we're going to think about what we could put in there for the fall. And
so this kind of falls more in the space utilization, like the heavy feeder, heavy giver, heavy feeder, light feeder kind of rotation that you can do.
What we've just mentioned, we've said this in many other webinars, and we might have taken for granted that not everybody might know what heavy feeder, heavy giver, light feeder is, but it's basically the nutritional need of each crop. So a heavy giver is usually a legume. Heavy feeder is usually like our brassicas, our tomatoes, our fruiting crops, our squashes. And then a light feeder is like a lettuce or arugula or a leafy green usually, except for brassicas, carrots. Yeah. So and this is based on nitrogen requirements. And these are 2 lettuce beans, fall greens, arugula tomatoes, fava beans follow that pattern of not putting 2 heavy feeders in sequence with one another, so as not to deplete the soil. And that's a reason. I mean, that's an example of growing ecologically, which we'll come to in a moment, where really the question we're trying to answer with this webinar is, how do we succession plant ecologically, if we were to be more specific about it. Ecological succession mimics how nature fills the space continuously, and we will see this more with the example that Dave will be sharing with us of how when we succession plant our things, we're still thinking of how we might fill those empty gaps and spaces with crops that make sense to the soil, to the space that we have, using the most amount of space, the least amount of space, but the most amount of harvest in that space. So how to succession plant ecologically? This is yours, Dave.
So before we kind of dive into some examples, I wanted to take a step back and help everybody kind of think about plant families. So you have certain common plant families that like the heat. and you have others that don't really like the heat. So what I want everybody to kind of initially think about is in the summer, you shouldn't be growing. I mean, you can get away with it if you take a lot of effort, but it's not easy to grow cool season crops. So the two main families that prefer cool weather are brassicas. So this is your broccoli, kale, cauliflower, radish, etc. Japanese greens, so like Napa cabbage, Tokyo bicana. The problem is in the summer, a lot of these plants are programmed to flower. So as soon as the temperature hits a certain level, they're going to bolt and then become woody and bitter and not very palatable. So that it's just, and you also get a lot more insects in the summer that attack those kind of crops. So generally, it's better to grow those things in the summer or the fall. And it's the same thing with the umbellifer family. So these are like carrots, dill, parsley, fennel, cilantro, parsnips. They also, they're going to start to try to flower in the hot weather. So it's instead of fighting nature, just set those plant families aside. And then this is the time for your super fruiting, high intensity plants that love the heat. So the main three families are legumes, which are in the Fabaceae family. And if you're tired of bush beans, you can kind of mix it up and plant different kinds of bush beans like edamame to have like fresh
Mung
edamame.
beans,
You can grow
soybeans,
peanuts. You can grow black-eyed peas. So you can really kind of change it up.
pigeon peas.
So they have the same kind of growth habit, but you're getting a different kind of bean out of it. You have your cucurbits. So these are your cucumbers, squash, melons, watermelon, pumpkin, zucchini. And then you have your solanaceae. So this is your eggplants, your ground cherries, your tomatoes, and your peppers. And then when I was researching this, I found that you have these kind of like interesting subtropical supporting players. They don't, you can't really characterize the whole plant family as being heat loving, but there's some of them of, like one member of each of these. They're kind of like outliers that all do well in the heat. So these are other things that you can consider growing during the summer that are going to kind of fill in the spaces and support your main three plant families.
Okay.
So this is I just came up with an example. I'm not sure if the placement of this in the order is correct, but this is just an example of how you could do some of those plantings in a raised bed. So I'll have to explain this a bit. I wanted to make it a bit more self-explanatory. Let's assume that you had 2 raised beds and you wanted to have a diverse planting in each, that you could do succession planting with some of those plants around your main plant. So in raised bed 1, your main star player is your tomato. You have calendula, and I think there's a slide after this that talks about flowers. So I apologize, the placement of this is a little out of order, but calendula is a fast growing annual flower that will act as a pollinator all summer long. So it blooms during the summer, so it can attract pollinators into your raised bed to pollinate your vegetables. Basil and mizuna can be succession crops. So basil is a slow germinating crop. It takes about 3 weeks to grow from seed until you transplant it. But once you get it in the garden, it's a fast grower. So the way to think about that is with basil, probably every 3 weeks, you want to be starting, if you're starting it from seed, you would do a succession planting with basil every 3 weeks. Now, mizuna, I was trying to come up with a lettuce alternative. During the summer, there are a few, and Nicky will talk about this, there are a few options that are not in the lettuce family or the brassicas that you can grow that are leafy that you can eat during the summer. But mizuna is one of the most common alternatives. That it's a little more heat tolerant, and you can harvest it young, and it grows really fast. So This one germinates really quickly in about a week. So you can do succession planting of Mizuna every 2 weeks, and then you would harvest. You would basically be done with each wave of Mizuna after a month. So the only thing I would recommend is when you're doing the succession planting that you kind of stagger that. So you don't put the Mizuna in the second wave in the same place that you put the Mizuna in the first wave. So the easiest way to do that is you have two different areas where you're doing succession planting. So you might have basil and Mizuna, and you just swap the locations of those for your second wave. It's not really represented in the slide. I apologize for that. Then you have your legumes, which are going to provide nitrogen. So I recommend it in every kind of plant grouping that you have in the summer, you have some kind of nitrogen fixture, whether that's a pole bean, a peanut, or something like that. The nice thing about the winter squash, so in raised bed 1 I have a winter squash, and raised bed 2 I have sweet potatoes. So these two candidates are really nice because they become ground covers. So what they do is they prevent some of that evaporation. It takes a little bit longer for them to establish, but once they're established, you're losing a lot less water because they'll spread out throughout your raised bed and kind of cover the soil and prevent evaporation. In the second bed, I have the sweet potato, and then instead of the winter squash, I have a cucumber, which is a very high yielding cucurbit. And then instead of tomato, I have okra, because okra, the size of an okra plant, it can get quite big. It can get like 6 to 10 feet tall and take up quite a lot of room. So the okra is kind of filling the role of the tomato in this bed. And then borage is also a nice summer-loving, heat-loving pollinator that does well in the summer. So that's another candidate. It grows very quickly. You can still start it now from seed.
And edible flowers as well.
And
Calendula as well, edible flowers.
And then another common choice for leafy greens is Swiss chard if you harvest it young. So you can do succession waves of Swiss chard. So it takes a little longer to germinate. It might take 2 to 3 weeks from seed before you could transplant it. But then if you could it grows quite quickly, and you're harvesting it only about 3 weeks after you transplant it. So that's how you could do succession waves with Swiss chard.
And these are all screenshots from the app Sage that Dave's created. So you can see from the app when one would recommend starting it, and you can
so it doesn't currently support succession, but it's something that we're
working on. And then at least the space is used. You'll see if your space still has space enough for what you're planning to do.
Did you want to just check the chat to see if
Thank you so much. Sorry. We do have a Q&A at the end. Let's see. So Wilma said her broccoli, bok choy, and cabbage did not do well. Or cabbage didn't do well. Well, our variety of cabbage did not head, right? As well as we wanted it to. Us, but she said her broccoli cabbage did not. If your question's about my brassicas, I've tried local varieties, but really doesn't grow much. The cabbage just made some leaves, and the broccoli maybe 1/2 inch head, and the bok choy didn't look botchy. I have grown before, but not here. Just don't know what to do differently. So carrots are more cool season, but mine are just growing their tops. And we are just getting warm weather. That's right. It's not the season for carrots anymore.
Yeah, I can give a quick tip on cabbages. So I've experimented with a lot of the common varieties of cabbage. And the problem with those, I think they're more intended for Europe in terms of the climates, because the cabbage heads that they're trying to grow are like, 20, 30 pound cabbage heads. And if you're in kind of like temperate America, where you're getting hot temperatures in the summer and like high 80s, 90s, the cabbage won't really form that head. So there are varieties that have been made for this kind of more southern climates, and the one that I would recommend is called Wakefield. So I've had a lot of success. It doesn't form a large head. It only forms like a 2-pound head, but it's very reliable in terms of like you're actually going to get a head instead of having to just harvest the loose leaves. You just get loose leaves.
What about the broccoli? This is the first year that I feel like we actually have broccoli florets, broccoli heads that we're making into broccoli and
So this is
shoots
a
and
new variety that I got from Baker's Creek called Rasmus. I did have to start it early. So the one thing with some of these brassicas is you think that they're not doing well in the cold, but it's almost required that you have to get them in the cold because they need that root development time. So it looks like they're struggling and then suddenly they start heading. So the nice thing about this variety is the main head is not very big, but it does a lot of side shoots. So we've had almost continuous side shoots uh, producing from. So as far as heirloom varieties, that's one that I would recommend.
okay. And how about this slide? Flowers in the summer garden.
So this slide I actually intended to be before the
Before.
other slide, and I just wanted people to think about gardeners to think not just about their main vegetables, but to think about flowers as well, because it can cost a lot if you want to buy ready to, you can get these flowers everywhere that are already grown out, but the problem is they're already root bound, and as soon as they look beautiful in the store, and then you bring them home and you transplant them and they die instantly because they have root shock, they're not ready to go in the ground, they're not ready for the heat. So this is just uh, an idea to kind of prompt you, motivate you to think about you can grow your own flowers, and it's way cheaper to grow your own flowers, and then you can have as many flowers as you want. So just like with the vegetables, the first column here is the germination, and the second one is how long before they'll bloom. So you can see these ones up at the top are kind of the easier ones that you can even start now and be successful with them. They're all annuals, so they'll all you'll be able to enjoy them this year. So things like calendula, nasturtium likes it a bit cooler, but a lot of these will do well in the sun, especially something like a zinnia. Once it starts blooming, it'll continue blooming until frost. So it's very easy to get germination with zinnias. The ones lower down that are in blue are actually perennials. So even though they might not flower the first year, they're kind of like a long-term investment. So if you get them growing this year, then you'll have them for years to come. So like last year we started a bunch of echinacea from seed, and they didn't really flower much last year, but this year we're going to get huge big bouquets of echinacea. Oh, and this is just to reinforce what I was talking about, sweet potato or pumpkin as a ground cover. So you can kind of think when you're making your plantings and figuring out where plants should go in your summer garden, just think about their height as well. So you want your tall plants to kind of be like towers, and then you have your medium plants that kind of surround your towers, and then you have your ground covers that
Herbage.
just kind of fill out the gaps so that you don't have to water so much. Because if you just have your towers by themselves, then the soil is just going to dry out in between them. You're going to have to water constantly. You're going to get more salty, alkaline soil from all that watering. So what you want to do is use nature to your advantage to kind of keep as much moisture as you can in the soil. You can also mulch with straw as well to fill in that gaps, but you really don't want any, if you can help it, you don't really want any exposed soil during the summer, but because the heat will dry it and kind of bake that really quickly.
Yeah, in flower design speak, they call what we're trying to do here on several 3D, 4D, thriller, filler, spiller. So if you have even just a pot that you're growing in, there's a thriller, which is what we call the star players. Me and is just us using that terminology, like your main towering thing. A filler, which is like the herbaceous layer in this case, and then a spiller that spills out of the pot. it's like an element of design, elements of design at play, but at work as well, and function. So they're not just beautiful, but they're functional as well. Summer salad succession.
So if you really, really have to grow lettuce during the summer, so the main problem with lettuce during the summer is just like a brassica, it tends to bolt as quickly as possible, and then when it bolts, the taste of the lettuce becomes a lot bitter, more bitter. So there's a few strategies that you can try to grow lettuce during the summer. So one is growing a heat-tolerant variety. So I've tried literally dozens of different lettuce varieties, and most of them are, there are certain varieties that will grow okay during the summer, but then they don't taste very good. So I would say that the deer tongue and the oak leaf lettuces kind of fall in that category. You can get them, they won't be so bitter, but they're not very good to start off with. So these are varieties that you can grow pretty successfully. I found this Kragener as interestingly a Boston type lettuce, so like a butter crunch, that usually butter crunches don't do well in the summer, but if you get it established in the shade or get it established first, it doesn't actually turn bitter. So that's kind of an interesting thing to do. So other things that you can do to try kind of slow down the bolting process is to use find microclimates in your garden that are very shady, where the temperature is way cooler. So you can try planting lettuce in these kind of like microclimates where you probably couldn't grow anything else during the summer. So at least you're using up the space. Another option is to create your own microclimate using shade cloth. So we use Agribon, which is we use it for insulation during the winter, but we use it as something to block out the sun during the summer.
I think it should be darker though for like most climates. Maybe we can get away with like the white, but I've heard that a darker shade cloth is better, or colored shade cloth to use that is
Well, the
better
only
than
thing
a
is
white
if it's
one.
too colored, then it's absorbing heat.
Then
And
it'll fry the stuff underneath.
Well, it'll absorb
It's already
heat and then
frying.
it'll yield the heat underneath it gradually over time. So if you're going with something that's more opaque, then anything that's a little bit more reflective
As long as it
helps.
can breathe, that's the other thing. It has to be breathable.
And
And
then
then
finally, one thing is just to not wait for the full head to develop. You're just cutting it at a baby leaf level. And the only comment I would add on this is if you're going to just go for the baby lettuce,
just grow
you're going to have to
microgreens.
grow a lot more of it
Yeah.
to get the same amount that you would get from a single head.
I would also like to clarify that deer tongue and oak leaf are not the varieties themselves, but they're attributes of the varieties that, so sometimes
So
we'll get
yeah, it's just
a
describing the shape of the leaves that the lettuce tends to form. So it forms these long, elongated, triangular leaves instead of kind of a classic head that you think of like an iceberg lettuce.
right. Any questions before we go on? I'll keep moving. Oops. Okay, succession greens. So sometimes there are some little known succession greens because I'm from the Philippines, the tropics, and we still have greens during the summer. And so the greens that are actually successful that you could eat as a spinach, type variety, spinach meaning it can be cooked and maybe preferably cooked because of oxalic acid, or it can be eaten as baby leaves, are Malabar spinach, which are not true spinaches. Like if you look at their family, their name, it's not from the spinach family. And New Zealand spinach. And these are tropical greens. And then Kalaloo is actually an amaranth green that if you're from Jamaica, this is the veggie of choice during the summer months, the green of choice. So yeah, no pest brush, perfect for the gap left when garlic comes out late in June, Kalaloo. So this you can grow in the heat.
So I'd mentioned some possible spinach salad recipes that don't use lettuce as their base or leafy greens as their base. So these are three possibilities. So one is called succotash, and the base there is then corn so that you've cut off the cob, and then you fill that in with smaller, fast-growing vegetables from your garden. So you have your edamame, your beans, your cherry tomatoes, which cherry tomatoes form earlier than beefsteak tomatoes, and then cucumbers actually are one of the earliest cucurbits, so you can get them in the forming heads in the early midsummer. And then basil, cilantro is something that you can't really grow during the summer, but yeah, if you dried it already, then you can mix it in, and then mix in the basil succession with that. So that's one. If you look up succotash, recipes for succotash, then you can find all kinds of summer recipes that use your actual produce from your summer garden. Panzanella is one that's it's a bread based, so that you mix in chunks of bread with your tomatoes and cucumbers. So it's a kind of you have the similar mix-ins that you have with succotash, but you're using bread as your kind of base there. And then finally, this happens a little later in the season, but once you start to get melons, you can make melon salads. So it's very cooling in the kind of late summer, is that you mix in chunks, that becomes your base, is the melon, and then you have your fill-ins for the melon.
Cool. Oops. Oh, I have to go down. Thomas Jefferson is known for saying a plant thimble full of lettuce every 2 weeks from April through November in Virginia. And we're like, oh, I wonder if you could do that here now with climate change and everything. But there must be some basis for him saying that every 2 weeks. So what are the every 2 weeks things that you could sow? So leafy greens that we mentioned, the heat tolerant ones, the basil and mint family members, and bush beans. So if you were just leave this webinar with 3 things that you can succession plant all the time till November, or October maybe for beans, then you would hopefully remember leafy greens, the heat tolerant leafy greens, basil and mint family members, and bush beans. Practical summer tips. Are we good on time, Dave?
I don't know the time.
Let me see. It's 8:06.
Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so finally, these are more like summer maintenance tips, because what's happening in your garden is a little different during the summer than what's happening in the spring. So these are just things like to help you with getting your plants into the garden, getting them established, and making sure that they're successful.
Sorry. Oh, one question that we want you to, I know that we often get is, how do I transplant in the heat? So observing the microclimate first, where does your land create natural cooling? Plant into those spaces and transplant in the evening. It says evening, not the morning. When do you transplant?
So what I've found, this is kind of like one of my little hacks, is that I found that certain crops are pretty fragile when you first get them established. So you go through the natural things that you do for transplants anyway. You have to think of transplanting as you have this seedling, you're moving it to a new house. That's a stressful process. So you will be doing extra care to the plant to make sure it's as happy as possible. So you acclimate the plant to the hot temperatures is one of the first things. You want to do extra watering when you do the transplant, both before and after, and every day until you start seeing new growth on the plant.
Before, but and after.
But one of the real hacks that I found has helped a lot is I found even if I surround these delicate seedlings with straw and I'm extra watering it, the 90-degree sun will come out and bake it. So what I do is I will cover it with a row cover of some kind, a translucent, so it lets in some light, but it's blocking out a lot of light. And I found that if I do that for about a week, after I do the transplant. So things like cucurbits or beans that will do fine once they're established and they can take the heat and no problem. And in fact, they'll love the heat. But that first week or two, they're really fragile. So I'll just drape it very loosely. I'm not trying to
Stifle it.
stifle it, but I'm just trying to prevent all of that light from
And
shriveling up those initial seed leaves, the cotton leaves. So I'll just kind of drape that over. I'll still peel it back and water it every day, but I'll leave that on for about a week or two. And once I start seeing new growth on that, then I feel a bit more confident and I'll remove that cover.
How do I water my summer garden? So if you are using drip or an automated watering system, we would recommend like the ground level drip rather than overhead. The best really is if you can water by a hand with your, because you have these opportunities to observe your plants whenever you go out there and water. But if you have a big operation or you're going out, then drip irrigation is probably the key for the summer months. And then we don't even have drip irrigation because we are not in the desertified areas of the United States. We still get rainfall, significant rainfall, at least right now, weekly, if not every other day.
And then if you are watering, there's two things to consider with why you're worrying about the root zone and things like that when you're watering. So the first thing is, if you're going to water, it's better to do like a deep, slow watering occasionally than just a few dribbles every day, because what happens is the evaporation will quickly get rid of those few dribbles, and then not much of the water will actually get to the root zone of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And then second of all, during the summer is really when you have to start thinking about fungal diseases, especially in more humid climates. So a lot of these things that we mentioned, cucurbits and solanaceae, they grow quick, but they're also kind of susceptible to fungal diseases. So if you're getting water on the leaves or the leaves are touching the ground and you get like a rain event or something like that, and you have some fungus that's in the soil, it can splash the soil and get on the leaves of the plant. So what you're trying to do is get water to the roots, but not get the leaves so much so that it reduces the amount of fungal disease that you have.
To that end, one of the tips that we also gave for tomato planting was to pick the leaves, the bottom leaves, and to trellis it upward. That would go for most of the plants that are prone to fungal disease, especially cucurbits, cucumbers in particular. Like to have that root zone area a little bit more airy and free would be great. And then we do a lot of mulching. So annuals would be, we usually use straw. Wood chips would be if we had perennials. But use what you have, like if you have grass clippings, to put those in areas that have bare soil, have no bare soil, deliver moisture directly to the roots.
And the healthier that your soil is, the less fungal diseases you'll naturally have. There's a question.
Great, Wilma. Yes, she's gone.
Okay, and then this is kind of like a pro tip. So, your leaves of your plants have a certain amount of space, like coverage, and if they get colonized by beneficial life forms, like beneficial microbiota, then they're less likely, those beneficial organisms are going to compete with the nasty fungal diseases. So what you can do is
I think that's in my next slide.
Oh, you're talking about it?
Yes, so
Okay,
one is to use compost tea as a foliar spray. What other foliar sprays were you thinking of?
Well, anything where you have a healthy
life microbiota in it. So we don't recommend you don't need to brew your tea for hours on end. You just need to have good compost that you think is teeming with life, good life. The compost smells good and earthy. Dunk it in water, It can be nettle, it can be one of those dynamic accumulators that we often talk about in permaculture, nettle or comfrey or leaves that are high in nutritive value, a kelp meal, tea,
And honestly, it doesn't even have to be that organized. You could probably gather random weeds.
True, you could
I
gather
mean,
random
I could
weeds.
probably get in trouble for that, but you could probably just gather random weeds and soak them in cold water for like a day, and then use the water from that and use it as a foliar spray.
Yeah, you don't need to bubble. I mean, soaking is enough. And then, I mean, I would soak it like a worm tea for me, a red regular composting tea. Compost tea is what I normally use. And I know that in the gut of the Eisenia fetida red regular worm are millions of different bacteria, majority of which are beneficial to plants. And so that's what I'm spraying on the foliar, on the leaves of the foliage of my tomatoes, the
So,
prized crops that I want to
so
make sure.
remember, you're not just fulfilling one function, like
Yes.
you are feeding the plant
You're boosting
somewhat,
its immune system, you're
but you're
feeding it.
also improving reducing the likelihood that you'll get fungal diseases on the leaves.
And then composting, every time you switch to the next, you take a plant out or you clear a place and then you're going to put stuff in or in between. Try to side dress with good quality compost or whatever you have, compost, honestly, in the end, banana leaves, coffee grounds from Starbucks, those kinds of things that you can get your hands on. Ground level drip irrigation. Choose plants indigenous to your region. Okay, I don't think that was related, but okay, ground. We already talked about that.
So one of the unfortunate things about the summer, one of the good things is that your plants grow much faster. You're getting much more sunlight. One of the negative things is you get a lot more insects. So you have to deal with the insects, and there's a number of strategies to deal with the insects. So one thing is to not grow all of the same type of plant in the same area. So if you're I would recommend that you mix and match your plants. Let's say you have 5 things that you want to grow in your summer garden. Don't have area number 1 that has plant number 1, area number 2 that has plant number 2. Try to mix some of each in each area. So, in area 1, you have a few of all 5 of those things. And that will just help, first of all, spread out. If you have the insects in one area, they may not spread to the other areas because there is a little bit of space separation from them. You can also plant aromatics. So these are things that confuse the insects because a lot of insects, they smell their way. They kind of sense through the smell where the plants that they like to eat are. So if you have things that are producing scents that are kind of confusing, then it can keep some of these insects away. Depending on the type of insects, I think this is mostly effective for beetles. Beetles like to lay their eggs on the undersides of a lot of these leaves. So you have things like cucumber, squash bugs, or harlequin bugs, and they'll lay all their eggs underneath the leaves of the plants that they attack. And what happens is, initially the larvae of these are not doing a lot of damage, but it's the sheer numbers of them because there's hundreds of eggs that are being laid. So this is kind of tedious, but what you can do is you can regularly go through and just check the underside of the leaves of these plants. And if you see the eggs, that's an easy way. It's much easier to get rid of these insects when you're getting rid of their eggs instead of the actual large insects. So if you can get rid of, usually those eggs are laid at the beginning of the summer season. So it's on your younger crops or right before they're starting to fruit that it'll be most effective to do this kind of manual examination. Now, there's some crops that's just impossible to keep the insects away. Like we have a lot of trouble growing eggplant because we have flea beetles. They're these little black beetles that do pock holes in your eggplant until you have no eggplant leaves left at all, and they come in the thousands. And sometimes the only way to keep these things out is to have a transparent row cover, so it's kind of like a very fine mesh, that will let air in and sunlight in, but keep these insects out. So in that case, it's probably good to have your kind of high value crops in a specific area so that you can protect them effectively. And then,
Oh, sorry.
and then finally, what you can do is there's certain, for example, with cucurbits, there's some crops that might not be as desirable, like spaghetti squash, that grow really quick, that you can use as a trap crop for your pumpkins or your cucumbers, which are a little more delicate, and you might value getting your cucumbers or pumpkins more than your spaghetti squash. So what you do is you grow the trap crop somewhere away from your main crops, and then it'll attract all the insects. And what you can do is you can remove a lot of the adult population. You come along with a big garbage bag and you just put the entire plant in that garbage bag, and you've just gotten rid of a lot of those insects.
Great.